At 0200 hours on February 26, 1852, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Seton felt the HMS Birkenhead shudder beneath his feet. The troopship had struck something hard. In the darkness off Danger Point, South Africa, 643 souls were aboard. 480 British soldiers, 26 women, 31 children, and 106 crew. The forward compartments flooded in seconds. Below deck, 90 men drowned in their hammocks before they could wake. Seton had minutes to make a decision that would establish a protocol still honoured 174 years later. The Birkenhead was an iron-hulled paddle steamer, 210 feet long, commissioned by the Royal Navy in 1845. She displaced 1,400 tons, powered by two 140-horsepower steam engines, driving paddle wheels 30 feet in diameter. On this voyage, she carried reinforcements for the 8th Frontier War, troops from 11 different regiments, fresh recruits and seasoned veterans, most between 18 and 35 years old. The passengers included officers' families, women traveling to join husbands stationed at the Cape, children who had never seen their father's posting. Captain Robert Salmond commanded the vessel. He'd served 32 years in the Royal Navy, survived 3 major engagements, knew these waters. But on this moonless night, he was running too close to shore. Standard procedure called for staying at least 3 miles from the coastline. Salmond had closed to less than 2 miles, attempting to make better time to Port Elizabeth. At 0200, travelling at 8 knots, the Birkenhead struck an uncharted rock pinnacle. The impact tore a 12-foot gash in the forward hull directly beneath the troop quarters. Water rushed in at approximately 40 tons per minute. The forward lower deck housed the married soldiers' quarters, the men sleeping with their wives, children in makeshift cribs between the hammocks. The compartment flooded in 120 seconds, in total darkness, in freezing water, trapped behind rapidly warping iron bulkheads. 90 men died without reaching the deck. Their screams echoed through the ship for less than 2 minutes. Then silence. On the upper deck, Lieutenant Colonel Seton took command of the military complement. Captain Salmond retained authority over the ship and crew, but the soldiers answered to Seton. He was 43 years old, had served in Afghanistan and India, held the respect of every man aboard. He assessed the situation in seconds. The ship was sinking. How fast, he couldn't know. But he knew the inventory: 3 serviceable lifeboats, capacity 60 each. 8 cutters, smaller craft, capacity 8 each. Total evacuation capacity, approximately 240 people, 643 people aboard. Seton gave his first order at 0203. All troops, muster on deck in formation. The soldiers responded with parade ground precision. Men emerged from below in various states of dress, some in full uniform, others in nightshirts, many barefoot. They formed ranks on the tilting deck as if on a Manchester parade ground. No shouting, no panic. They stood at attention while the ship broke apart beneath them. The paddle box had shattered in the collision. Both engines were still running, but the paddle wheels were useless. The port wheel completely destroyed, the starboard wheel half submerged and striking debris with each revolution. Chief Engineer Archie Wyam kept the pumps running at maximum capacity. They removed 18 tons of water per minute. The sea was flooding in at 40 tons per minute. Simple mathematics. The ship had perhaps 20 minutes. Captain Salmond ordered the lifeboats prepared. The crew worked efficiently. davits swung out, boats lowered to rail level, crews standing by with oars ready. 3 boats, 60 seats each. Salmond turned to Seton. The military commander understood immediately. He issued the order that would define the disaster. Women and children to the boats first. The men will stand fast. This protocol, prioritizing women and children in maritime disasters, had no formal basis in maritime law. It wasn't in the regulations. It wasn't in the training manuals. Individual captains had made similar decisions in previous wrecks, but never as an announced, enforced policy with military backing. Seton was establishing precedent in real time, and he was backing it with 480 armed soldiers trained to follow orders unto death. The women and children were brought forward. 26 women, 31 children, ages ranging from 6 months to 14 years. They were loaded into the boats with care, handed down by sailors, received by crew already in the boats, settled onto the thwarts. Some women protested. They wanted to stay with their husbands. They were overruled. Children cried. The loading took 8 minutes. 8 minutes while the ship settled deeper, the bow now completely submerged, water creeping aft past the foremast. At 2:11, the 3 lifeboats pushed away from the dying ship. They carried 57 people, all the women and children, plus a handful of crew to man the oars. That left 586 men aboard. Seton ordered the cutters prepared. The 8 small boats could take 64 more. He selected the crew to man them, experienced sailors who knew how to handle the boats in heavy surf. The cutters were lowered. They began taking men off in order of rank. Officers first, then senior NCOs. The process was orderly. No one rushed, no one jumped. Then the boiler exploded. At 02:14, the cold seawater reached the overheated boilers. The resulting steam explosion tore through the engine room, killed Chief Engineer Wyam and 6 stokers instantly, sent a pressure wave through the remaining intact compartments. The hull cracked amidships. The ship began to break in two. The funnel collapsed. Debris rained across the deck. Men were thrown off their feet. And still, they reformed ranks. Lieutenant Girardot of the 43rd Regiment was supervising the cutter loading when the explosion hit. He was thrown against the rail, suffered 3 broken ribs, pulled himself upright, continued directing the evacuation. Ensign Lucas of the 73rd Regiment was helping wounded men to the cutters when the deck beneath him buckled. He fell into the gap, caught himself on a stanchion, climbed back out. His left hand was crushed. He used his right hand to lift the next man down to the cutter. Captain Salmond knew the ship had minutes remaining. He released the crew from their stations. They could abandon ship, try to swim. Many did. They dove from the rails, struck out for the cutters or the distant shore, 2 miles away through shark-infested waters. Approximately 60 crew members entered the water. 12 reached the lifeboats, 6 reached shore. The rest drowned or were taken by sharks. The soldiers did not move. Seton had not released them from formation. They stood in their ranks while the deck tilted to 30 degrees. Water was now washing across the main deck. The bow section had completely separated and sunk. The stern section was rising out of the water, propeller and rudder fully exposed. Men were clinging to the rails, standing in water to their waists, maintaining their position in line. Not because they were held at gunpoint, not because they feared punishment, because Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Seton had given an order, and these were British soldiers of the line. The psychology is extraordinary. These were not elite troops. These were line infantry, many conscripts, most with fewer than 3 years' service. They weren't volunteers for a suicide mission. They were reinforcements heading to a colonial war, expecting garrison duty and occasional skirmishes. Yet, in the moment of maximum crisis, they defaulted to their training. Orders are followed. Discipline is maintained. You stand in formation until dismissed. At 02:18, Seton gave his final command. Those who can swim, jump and make for the boats. Those who cannot swim, remain by the wreck and hold on. Permission to break ranks. Permission to save themselves. The response was orderly. Men who could swim removed their boots, dove cleanly into the water, began swimming toward the cutters 200 yards away. Men who couldn't swim moved to the highest points of the wreck, found floating debris, prepared to ride the ship down and hope for rescue. The stern section rose to 60 degrees. Men were sliding down the deck, catching on hatch coamings, clinging to anything fixed. The paddle wheel was 40 feet above the water, spinning slowly in the air. At 02:20, the stern section capsized. It rolled over completely, trapped dozens of men beneath it, plunged toward the bottom. The final section of HMS Birkenhead disappeared at 02:21, exactly 21 minutes after striking the rock. 186 men were in the water. Some clung to debris, shattered masts, sections of decking, empty casks that had floated free. Some swam for the cutters, which were now overloaded and taking on water themselves. Some struck out for shore, 2 miles of open ocean, in darkness, in waters known to contain great white sharks. The surface temperature was 64 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to induce hypothermia within 2 hours. The sharks came within 10 minutes. Survivors reported seeing dorsal fins circling, then sudden disappearances as men were pulled under. Great white sharks are ambush predators. They strike from below, hit with enough force to stun or kill instantly. In the darkness, men couldn't see them coming. They felt the turbulence, heard the screams, then nothing. Approximately 40 men were taken by sharks between 02:30 and dawn. The cutters were in crisis. Overloaded, sitting low in the water, they were shipping waves with every swell. 2 capsized. The men aboard them were thrown into the water, most without life preservers. They tried to swim to other boats. Most drowned. The remaining cutters were so crowded that men hung from the gunwales, half submerged, hoping to be pulled aboard when others died or let go. Captain Salmond was in the water, clinging to a floating hatch cover. He was 51 years old, had multiple injuries from the boiler explosion, was losing body heat rapidly. He lasted 40 minutes. At approximately 0300, he released his grip and sank. His body was never recovered. Lieutenant Colonel Seton went down with the stern section. He was last seen standing on the quarterdeck as it rose vertical, still directing men to the rails, still maintaining command. He was trapped when the section capsized, dragged down with the wreckage. His body was never recovered. Ensign Lucas, the young officer with the crushed hand, managed to reach a cutter. He helped pull 12 other men aboard before the boat capsized from the weight. He swam to another cutter, was pulled aboard, collapsed from blood loss and exhaustion. He survived. Lieutenant Girardot, with 3 broken ribs, made it to shore. He swam for 4 hours, reaching the beach at 6:30. He found 7 other survivors already there, soldiers and crew who had made the swim. They built a fire, waited for rescue. Girardot survived, was later promoted to captain, served another 15 years. At dawn on February 26th, the 3 lifeboats containing the women and children reached the shore. All 57 passengers were alive. They had rowed throughout the night, guided by the lights of a coastal settlement. The women watched the sun rise over the ocean where their husbands had died 7 hours earlier. Not one woman had been lost, not one child. The shore party sent riders to the nearest British garrison. HMS Lioness, a Royal Navy schooner, arrived at the wreck site at 1100 hours. They found survivors clinging to floating debris, pulled 40 men from the water. They found bodies floating in the wreckage field, recovered 12 for burial. They found shark-damaged remains, couldn't identify them. The final count took 3 days to compile. Of 643 people aboard HMS Birkenhead, 193 survived. The breakdown was precise. All 26 women lived, all 31 children lived, 6 officers lived, 47 soldiers lived, 83 crew members lived. 450 dead. 438 of them were men who stood in formation while the ship sank beneath them. The story reached London in April 1852. The newspapers called it noble and unprecedented. Punch magazine published a poem titled The Loss of the Birkenhead, which immortalized the soldiers' discipline. King William IV, upon reading the reports, supposedly said, "The tradition of the sea is that the ship's captain is last to leave. The new tradition of the British Army is that women and children are first." The protocol was codified into naval regulations within the year. The phrase, "women and children first," entered global maritime law. It became known as the Birkenhead Drill, the standard evacuation protocol for passenger vessels. When the Titanic struck an iceberg 60 years later, in 1912, the order "women and children first" was given because of what happened off Danger Point in 1852. The precedent held, the protocol was followed. The wreck of HMS Birkenhead lies in 75 feet of water, 2 miles off Danger Point, South Africa. The site was located in 1958. Divers found the boilers, sections of the iron hull, scattered artifacts. The forward section, where 90 men drowned in their hammocks, is still largely intact, buried in sand. The stern section, which capsized with Seton aboard, is broken into pieces spread across 300 yards of seabed. In 1986, the South African Navy placed a memorial plaque at the site. It reads, "In memory of the soldiers, sailors, women and children who sailed aboard HMS Birkenhead. Their courage and discipline in the face of death established a tradition that endures to this day." The psychological question remains, why did they stay in formation? These were not volunteers for a suicide mission. These were not men making a calculated choice to sacrifice themselves. They were soldiers following orders in a moment of ultimate crisis, and their training overrode their survival instinct. The human brain in extreme stress defaults to established patterns. For these men, the established pattern was, an officer gives an order. You follow it. Stand in line. Wait your turn. Don't break ranks. It wasn't heroism in the traditional sense. It was discipline so ingrained that it became involuntary, and 438 men died because of it. The 3 lifeboats that carried the women and children were recovered intact. They were returned to service, used on other Royal Navy vessels, eventually retired in 1889. One is preserved in the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, London. There's a small brass plaque on the gunwale, HMS Birkenhead, 1852. The survivors struggled with what became known as survivor's guilt. Many of the soldiers who reached shore, who swam while their comrades stood in formation, reported nightmares for years afterward. They'd been given permission to save themselves, but the psychological weight of survival, of living because you could swim while others drowned because they couldn't, proved crushing for some. 3 soldiers who survived the wreck died by suicide within 5 years. The records note melancholia as the cause. The families of the lost received pensions, standard for British military deaths in service. Officers' widows received $100 annually. Enlisted men's widows received $15. The children received educational support until age 18. The Queen Victoria personally contributed to a relief fund that raised $7,000, approximately $800,000 in modern currency. It wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. The naval inquiry concluded that Captain Salmond had erred by sailing too close to shore in darkness without taking depth soundings. He was posthumously held responsible for the loss. No blame was assigned to Lieutenant Colonel Seton or the military complement. Their conduct was officially praised as exemplary and worthy of the highest traditions of the service. But there's a darker reading. 480 soldiers stood in formation and drowned because following orders was more deeply ingrained than self-preservation. The military created soldiers so disciplined that they could be commanded to their deaths. The Birkenhead wasn't a victory. It was a demonstration of how completely military training can override the human survival instinct. Whether that's admirable or horrifying depends on your perspective. The Birkenhead Drill saved lives in subsequent disasters. When the Titanic sank, 74% of women and 52% of children survived, compared to 20% of men. The protocol worked. Women and children went first. Men waited. Some ships adopted explicit Birkenhead protocol in their safety regulations. Women and children evacuate first, crew next, male passengers last, officers with the ship. But the protocol has also been criticized. In 1915, when the Lusitania was torpedoed, crew members enforced women and children first, even as the ship sank in 18 minutes. Too fast for orderly evacuation. Men were physically prevented from entering lifeboats, and many boats launched half-empty because there weren't enough women and children to fill them. 1,198 people died, including dozens of men who could have survived if the protocol had been more flexible. Modern maritime law has evolved. Current regulations require evacuation by proximity. Whoever is nearest to a lifeboat gets in, regardless of gender or age. The Birkenhead Drill is no longer mandatory, but it persists in culture, in expectation, in the unspoken rules of disaster response. In the 2012 Costa Concordia disaster, the captain abandoned ship before passengers. He was convicted of manslaughter and dereliction of duty. The standard still holds: women and children first, crew last, captain last of all. The story of HMS Birkenhead is about discipline, duty, and the cost of both. It's about 438 men who drowned in formation because an order is an order. It's about 57 women and children who lived because those men stayed in place. It's about a protocol that saved thousands of lives in the century that followed, built on the deaths of men who never chose to be heroes. They just couldn't break ranks. The wreck still lies off Danger Point. Divers visit occasionally. The water is cold, visibility poor, sharks common, but the site is protected. No artifacts may be removed, no disturbance of the remains. The men who died there, who stood in formation while the ship broke apart, are still at their posts, still waiting for the order to dismiss, still standing fast.